Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is James Hanson. I'm the Vice President and Publisher for NextGov, the Federal Technology News Division of Government Executive Media Group. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webcast. This message sent from my device, Securing Telework for 2020 and Beyond, presented by Lookout. As public and private industry shifts to telework, thanks to long-term innovation and short-term necessity, it's clear that telework is here to stay, but to what scale? This webcast will explore the concepts of security and mobility within the broader telework schema. How will personal devices and other technology tools accelerate the ease of telework? Well, today we'll discuss how government leaders in private and public sectors can boost user experience and security throughout and into the dawn of telework. But before we get started, I'd like to go over a couple quick housekeeping items. At the bottom of the platform, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab. That allows you to ask a question. We'll be fielding those towards the end of the program, but feel free to please submit them at any point in time where a question comes to mind. If you experience any technical difficulties, just click on the help icon and a member of our support team will assist you. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our two security evangelists and experts. You're in good company today. We have Michael Garrity, the Chief Information Security Officer with the state of New Jersey, and Tim Lemaster, Director of Systems Engineering at Lookout. At this time, I'll hand it over to Tim and Mike. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thanks, James. Appreciate the introduction. So good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. I'll just provide a quick overview of myself and a very quick one on Lookout, and then ask Mike to do the same. So my name, as James said, is Tim Lemaster. I lead a team of security architects and security engineers here at Lookout that help customers understand mobile threats specifically. And when I say mobile, I mean threats to iOS and Android devices, most notably. And Lookout's been doing this for over 10 years now, actually around 12 years now. We've been providing security for iOS and Android devices. We got our start in the consumer space, and then about 4 years ago, we moved into the enterprise and government space and provide solutions to allow government agencies and large companies to take advantage of the productivity associated with mobile, especially for things like we've experienced over the last 3 or 4 months of this pandemic, and feel confident in doing so from a security perspective. I've been here 5 years now doing this, and prior to that, I worked at Juniper Networks doing cybersecurity and network security kind of issues, things there. And I've had roles before that in the contracting world, in government, so a long history of working in the cybersecurity and networking space. So that's my background and a quick background on Lookout. Mike, do you want to provide a quick update on yourself and your background?
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Mike Garrity. I'm the state's Chief Information Security Officer for New Jersey. I'm also the Director of the New Jersey Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Cell, the NJKIC. And I guess, what's interesting about the NJKIC and my role is we're the only state in the nation where cybersecurity is organized under the Office of Homeland Security and Preparedness rather than the Office of Information Technology. So our job is to lead and coordinate the state's cybersecurity efforts and make sure that we maintain resilience of the state against all sorts of cyber attacks. I've been in this role for about 4 years now. Have a lot of experience both in the public and private sector going back into the 80s and early 90s where I started the high-tech crimes or the computer crimes unit within the New Jersey State Police. Left there, went to Bell Labs, Lucent Technologies, Prudential Financial, and some other roles as well. So I've been in this space, whether it's not mobile or mobile, and we think we can provide a pretty good update to you and to everybody in the audience on what some of the new threats are and some of the strategies are to mitigate those.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for taking the time to do this with us today. So This is, goes without saying, this has been a really interesting time. The pandemic has changed a lot about how we all work. And although telework has been a thing for a while now, many of us, not everybody certainly, but many of us telework 1 or 2 days a week, or when we have certain, family commitments and that sort of thing. But the pandemic has just had such an impact on the number of people teleworking, and I think for the most part we found that it has worked for most organizations. It's really been stressed, I think, a little bit in the beginning. It stressed the systems, but by and large, I think it's working. And so I think at this point it's fair to say that it's here to stay. We're going to see more, or continue to see large numbers of people teleworking, I believe. I've even read reports, for example, about a number of companies and organizations that have reduced their office footprint because of the success of teleworking. And so, as we keep that in background as context, just to ask, maybe what your thoughts are on what the future of this hybrid telework, remote work / office work will look like. What will that future workforce look like, in your opinion?
Sure. So interesting you mentioned that many organizations already did telework in some capacity. Here in the state of New Jersey, prior to COVID-19, we had a no work from home policy, which is interesting. And overnight, we went from no work from home to a mandatory telework policy, obviously for social distancing and health reasons and the like. So the move towards that was quite dramatic here in the state of New Jersey. That being said, in various organizations, I've been teleworking or working remotely. If you're in cybersecurity, unless you're spending 24 hours a day within the office, you're working remotely because that's a 24-hour-a-day job. But as you said, the initial uptick of telework and the experiences have found that many organizations are just as productive as they were while they were in the office, and some even more so. That being said, not all jobs are cut out for telework or remote work. There's still those jobs that need to be done in person, whether it's law enforcement or your hospital workers and healthcare workers and the like. However, we're going to see more and more of those knowledge workers that can work remotely. That being said, I'm not convinced that the long-term productivity is going to be there. And then, how do we grow our talent and grow our professional development for our staff if they don't have that mentor in the office, if they're not working with a team and they're not interacting? So I think we get some lessons to learn over the next few months, if not years, and I think that will play out. But as you said, it's here. It's not going away anytime soon. And so we're all making the best of it as we go along.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And certainly that ad hoc meeting that we all were familiar with, where you just walk next door or cubicle or office and ask a colleague a quick question and that sort of thing, doesn't happen as often in the current environment. But on the flip side, you can sometimes get a little more done because you can stay a little more focused and that sort of thing, or at least that's my experience. I don't know what it's been like for you and your team. Have you found that it's been easy to have ad hoc over, some kind of a unified communications platform or something, or how do you handle just ad hoc quick questions as a team?
So we use obviously various communications methods, as virtual teleconferencing, but we also have instant messaging through whether it's Skype or Teams or other platforms and the like, and that helps all of us stay together as a team, and that's really important to maintain that continuity and that communication, so you can have ad hoc. Not everything can be a calendar invite and a formal meeting. There has to be, hey, what about this type of questions, and what do I do here, those types of things.
Yeah, that makes sense, and we're certainly seeing that as well in my smaller team, I'm sure, than yours, but you still need those ad hoc things. And my schedule gets filled up with a lot of video, whether it be Teams or Zoom or what have you. But I found that I need to block off time for other work to be done. Otherwise, it seems like it's just constantly in meetings all day. So it's a new experience, and we're all adjusting to it. So I was just going to ask, so Mike, your background is so impressive, both as a CISO, but just various roles throughout cybersecurity and even law enforcement. I think you served in a law enforcement capacity years ago. So if you put on your, big picture kind of hat, tell us what you think the future of cybersecurity will look like, especially given this new reliance on telework and in particular mobile, because we are all working from home and working remotely. And as you said, in cybersecurity, we've often worked remotely from mobile devices, but it's just exacerbated right now. What do you think that's going to look like from a big picture kind of perspective?
So I think, great question. And I think, cybersecurity, as I said here, the role here is under the Office of Homeland Security, and I can see that continuing throughout other organizations. Cybersecurity or information assurance or information security, whatever you want to call it, less sexy names if you were, they were part and parcel of an IT organization. However, cybersecurity threats go well beyond IT, and we see this convergence of physical and cyber systems, whether they be monitoring devices that are monitoring air pollution, whether they be HVAC systems, elevators, autonomous vehicles, smart cities, smart buildings. All of those things are not necessarily within an IT organization, so we need to think of it as an all threats, all hazards perspective all the time, and so it really just comes down to security, the melding of physical and cyber and that convergence that we see.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Organizations have been talking about doing that, aggregation of of security events, not necessarily cybersecurity events, as you pointed out, into one platform, or combining those into a view that allows you to see all threats. But not many people have been able to really realize that perspective as much as perhaps you guys have. Do you feel like you've got a pretty good handle on this, common operating picture, or various terms that are used for it, that allow you to get that big picture view of what's going on in cyber versus physical and desktop and data center, all those sort of things? Do you have a pretty good view of that from one platform?
I think conceptually we do. We still have challenges across business units and organizations. There are some people, obviously, that are in one role in physical security that are not comfortable in technology or the cyber world, and so a lot of this is foreign to them. And so we'll continue to have those hurdles, but it is 2020, everybody should know what an IP address is, and everybody should know how technology works. And the reality is, whether you're a detective in law enforcement or you're a physical security person, you're going to have some technology skills and some cyber skills.
Yeah, of course. That makes sense. So you mentioned that the state prior to the pandemic didn't really permit people to telework. But being forced to do so, it sounded like going fairly well for you. Did you find that mobile devices were a big key to that? And if so, were people using personal devices? And what impact will personal devices have on this telework environment as compared to GFE or government furnished or corporate owned devices? Any perspective on that?
Yeah, so we had a combination of both personal and government-provided devices, business-provided devices, if you will. And obviously, there's different controls that you implement across those devices. For instance, in a smartphone or a tablet that is government-owned, you may manage the entire device, so mobile device management, if you will. However, in a world of a BYOD device, you may just manage the applications that the individuals use for conducting business and the like. So we've got that hybrid out there. It's working. But again, we have some challenges there, not only in getting people to be comfortable using those devices and carrying out business that they weren't doing before, but also in securing them and making sure they're not leaking data and all the controls are in place.
Sure. Well, and of course, personal devices introduce some new risks, right? I mean, if it's someone's personal device, they may have applications on there that if it were an organization-only owned device, they may not load. And there's some of those apps we've seen in our work, for example, at Lookout, that some of the apps that we all use and enjoy using recreationally are not necessarily malicious in intent, but they collect a lot of data from the device, from the users, and share that with other services for advertising purposes and that sort of thing. They're all trying to make money ultimately, in many cases off of our data, personal data, most oftenly. And so these personal devices introduce a new set of risks that have to be managed, like you said, with a little different perspective than the business furnished devices. So when you as an organization, when you look at your devices that are out there, do you apply a different set of policies, or just where do you draw that line between personal and business?
Yeah, and great question. So obviously with a government-provided device, you can control what apps are downloaded and from what app stores and the like. For a personal device, a BYOD device, you can't necessarily do that. However, you can have conditional access. If you want to use that device, then these applications are not allowed to be installed on your personal device. And those are, some of the ones that you mentioned that are collecting a lot of information, but not just collecting information, those that are associated with foreign governments that may pose more of a
provide some opportunity, yeah.
Yeah. And I think you can guess which ones I'm talking about.
Without explicitly defining it, right?
Yeah.
The one of them that's been in the news a lot lately, or at least one example.
Yeah, and then the other one, if you want to see what I look like when I'm older, you can download that one too.
Right, of course. So yeah, thanks for that input. So what about user experience, for example? Have you found that you've been able to manage user experience for your employees adequately for them while they work at home during this transition? Did you have to make a lot of changes? What's been your experience with just helping users do this remote work, so to speak?
Yep. And so you put an adjective in there of adequate. And yeah, we're able to provide an adequate user experience. However, if you came from an office environment where you had dual monitors, a stand-up desk, an ergonomic chair, your user experience is going to be slightly different when you're sitting at the kitchen table at home or in your home office if you don't have all those amenities. Not only that, you may have issues like network latency and connectivity issues, so that the user experience can be frustrating. How you allow for printing of paper documents, and whether it's only allowed in the office or you're allowed to do it on connected printers at their homes and the like. So all those little things that define the user experience, they have to be worked through on an individual basis, and it's not the same for everybody, so that we can provide each person the best user experience that we can given the circumstances.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the printing example you gave is one that at least I don't think about very often, but just a short story, I had a little user experience with that very issue maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was connected on our corporate VPN for some work I was doing, and I hit print and presumed it would print to the printer, that I use here at my house, and it defaulted to the office printer because I was on the VPN. It was able to reach it and printed at the office, and it took me 15 minutes to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
So those little things like that can catch you off guard. Good point.
And the poor help desk people that have to handle an entirely remote workforce, they're overwhelmed right now.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I stopped. Fortunately, I stopped short of calling my help desk and complaining that I wasn't able to print from my computer. I figured it out on my own, but that's not always the case, as we know. Let's see. So so we've talked a lot about this telework impact on and the reliance on mobile devices as a part of that. How can agencies, whether federal or local or even private companies, protect the data that is so key to their mission and their organization from threat, whether that be insider threat or external threats? What are some of the just table stakes sort of things that you have implemented and recommend to your subordinate organizations as to how they begin to look at that?
So I think we talk about people, processes, and technologies, and in security we want to throw technology as a solution at every problem, and that's not the case. So one of the things that I would recommend, and one of the things that we do here, is we start with a telework or a mobile device policy that sets out rules of the road and what you can and cannot do. This way everybody's on the same page as far as doing that. But you also need to provide user education, on how to use the devices and what are the threats and what they should be aware of when working remotely. And then you can, obviously enforce those policies that are in your mobile device or telework policy through, using technologies. And this way you can make sure that, mobile devices aren't jailbroken, making sure that, they're encrypted, making sure that they have, screen lockout, and they require a password to get into, and those types of things. So all those different things you're going to throw at or apply to the problem, so that you can come up with some reasonably good mitigation strategies.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we've got a couple audience questions that have come in that I'm going to read, and I haven't had a chance to think through them myself very much yet, so I'll read through them, and then perhaps, Mike, you can take a first stab, and I might offer some thoughts on it. But the first question is, how can employers, whether government or otherwise, guarantee personal privacy on apps that are used for personal use and for business use, as those crossover apps become more common? For instance, social media apps and lines become blurred. So I think the question is essentially, how do you assure privacy for these applications that maybe offer some dual use or are used both professionally and personally, maybe something like a LinkedIn or something like that? I'm not certain what they had in mind, but that's the question. Mike, did you have enough time to think about that and want to have an opinion on it?
Yeah, so I'm going to take it in, and if I'm reading this right, so one thing, as a CISO, I'm never going to guarantee security, and I probably won't ever guarantee personal privacy on apps. That being said, those policies that I mentioned, they're not only for the users, they're for the administrators and the organization on what they can and cannot do. For instance, and I'll take New Jersey, if you're using your personal device, we've got a policy that we're not going to track where that device is, especially during off hours. The only time we'll do that if there is a cybersecurity incident and we need to find that device. But we don't want to know what you're doing on weekends, where you're going at night, those types of things. So they have to be part of that policy as far as what you can do as a government from a privacy perspective as well. We don't want to be looking at your photos or those other things on your personal device. However, if you're using a government device, all those are in scope for what can be managed and what can be looked at, from the business or the government.
Yeah, and that aligns with what we see in our customers, and when I talk to customers across, whether it be government and even commercial companies, many of them, most of them, frankly, take a very similar approach, and that is that if it's a corporate or government issued device, we have a certain set of expectations and policies, but they're still trying to respect that privacy line. Even if it is a GFE device, there's some things that they just are a step too far. For example, one example that I could offer would be looking at someone's browsing habits or or their SMS traffic or something like that. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see something that might be embarrassing or something for an organization or an employee. But for a BYO, that line is, even as you pointed out, even more firm. We don't allow, for example, with our platform, with our solution, we don't allow the employer or the admins to see certain information on the device. We restrict that, and we try to build our solution with privacy in mind, so that admins don't get that visibility by default. To respect that privacy line very carefully. So,
agreed.
Let's see. We have one more, at least right now, one more audience question that I'll go to. It says, how are you looking at security and price with regards to acquiring and disposing of mobile devices, phones, tablets, and laptops? Are you leveraging trade-in programs to receive higher recovery values? Are you looking at pre-owned devices for cost savings, as there are greater need for teleworking? So I think the question is primarily around how to manage cost and budget impact as we're all relying more and more on these devices for telework.
Yeah, and so I'll take that, in my previous role as a CIO, obviously price for mobile devices or laptops and like was really important. It seems like they have built-in obsolescence as far as a year for many mobile devices. Laptops a little bit more, but we do wipe and reissue mobile devices. We typically stay away from the latest and greatest of the devices that are out there because of the premium on cost that we're going to pay. So we may have an older generation iPhone or Android or tablet. However, with laptops, it's going to depend on the individual that needs the laptop, what their work is. If it's just doing documents and email, obviously they don't need 32 gig of RAM and the latest and greatest. However, others that are doing more intensive processing applications, data analytics and the like, they're going to need a beefier laptop. So all those things are taken into account as far as identifying them. We don't look at pre-owned devices for cost savings, although we do reissue our own. And I can tell you this, in state government here and elsewhere, there's been a lot of orders for laptops the last few months.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay. One of the other questions that I wanted to ask about was, as we've seen in the press and in lots of reporting, and we've seen this almost always invariably when you have some kind of significant event going on in the world, there are people that are trying to take advantage of that. Bad actors, scam artists, that sort of thing, people that just, trying to make a dollar or trying to steal information and sell it, that sort of thing. We've seen, for example, a lot of the threats around COVID-related messaging for phishing lures or phishing attempts. What kind of threats have you seen? Anything that surprised you, or anything new that you didn't really think of until the pandemic really became a big issue?
Well, as you said in the beginning, we see that threat actors take advantage of any disaster or tragedy out there, and this provided them a great opportunity for all sorts of different scams, whether they be getting you to open an email and downloading something, or providing credentials, or trying to sell a vaccine or a test kit, or all the other disinformation that's out there. It's tough enough to keep track of what is real good information, but through a lot of emails, it's just a lot of disinformation and sowing social discord and those types of things, whether it's on email or social media platforms, as you said. But we did see an uptick in the number of phishing emails, especially as it kicked off in March and April, a significant uptick, COVID-related, themed phishing emails.
Yeah, and I think that we've all seen that. But interestingly, from our perspective, from Lookout's perspective, it hasn't been limited to to email specifically, and so we've seen a fair amount of phishing attempts that take advantage of mobile to make it more difficult for a user to recognize a phishing attempt or a phishing URL to distinguish it from a real one. On a mobile device, it's harder to see the entire URL. It can come in from a lot of different ways, right? It can come in over SMS, or it can come in over iMessage or Signal or something like that, or social media, those phishing attempts. So there are a lot more ways to get it to the device. So that's one of the things that really surprised us a little bit, is just the creativity of some of the threat actors in trying to spread their phishing attempts around. And so with that in mind, from your experience and based on what we've seen as well, are there particular strategies or what have you guys been doing to mitigate and prevent these kinds of attacks? Is there anything that we could learn from there?
Yeah, so one of the things with the NJKIC, we are the state's central resource for cybersecurity threat intelligence and information sharing, along with best practices. And so we publish alerts. Obviously, we have a website, cyber.nj.gov. You can sign up to receive our bulletin that we put out on a weekly basis, as well as all sorts of alerts. We partner with the FBI, the Secret Service, the Department of Homeland Security, and we're part of the state's Fusion Center here in New Jersey. And so all that intelligence that we get, from all of those partner agencies and organizations, what we're doing is sharing that with the public and private sector and individuals, so that they're more informed on what the threats are and how to mitigate the risk of becoming a victim.
Yeah, of course. How big of a role does employee training play in that? Do you guys spend a lot of time on, for example, most organizations are doing some kind of phishing training, and do you conduct your own phishing exercises if you're comfortable talking about it, that sort of thing?
Oh yeah. So we do all those standard things as far as the annual security awareness training on all the different topics that are out there, refreshing and stuff like that. We do phishing simulation exercises targeting certain groups each week. We have a monthly bulletin. We obviously have alerts that go out, when new threats or let's say new compliance requirements or new laws that may affect individuals and the like. So we've got a pretty robust security awareness and training function here, and I think it's been helping because we get a lot of good feedback. And we get a lot of people pointing out things that some of the email filters and other things may not catch.
Yeah, of course. That's great. That's a pretty impressive set of procedures you have to exercise your employees that rigorously. I've seen a lot of really progressive organizations doing that, so it's impressive that you guys are doing that. What about so when you talked earlier in the conversation about mobile device managers and a little bit about their role and the difference between a BYO device, bring your own device, and a business issued device, And if you think about it from a how do you protect the data and the content and the devices associated with each one of those, how do you ensure that just because it's managed doesn't necessarily make it secure? So how do you balance that that visibility and that protection across the range of solutions or platforms that you have available to you? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so obviously applications of controls that you would, put on a device, it can't be jailbroken, all those different things, making sure there's anti-malware software on it if applicable, providing a secure web gateway option so that you're not visiting malicious sites, through a mobile device, encrypting the data at rest and in transit, doing things like geofencing to make sure, that device can only be used from, those locations that you want it to be used. All of those things as far as controlling the device. And then on the other side, those applications that you expose to the device, making sure you've got controls in there that only allow the individual to interact with the data on the server, but not to download the sensitive data or change the data on the device itself.
Of course, okay. So you're applying some role-based access controls of some level as well, it sounds like.
Yes, conditional access and the like.
Conditional access. Okay, very, very impressive. One of the other interesting trends that we've seen, not necessarily directly related to COVID, but certainly, again, gotten a little more life or a little more push behind it as a result of COVID, is this concept of zero trust architecture. And I think this is an especially important idea for devices like mobile because they often connect over an LTE or a cellular network and maybe don't come in over or go out, depending on who's receiving or sending, over the traditional network that you have, perimeter controls established with firewalls and good IPS and that sort of thing, WAFs and others. And so sometimes mobile devices can circumvent those. Are you interested as an organization in these zero trust architectures? And how do you feel that they'll be, what impact will they have on mobile?
Yeah, so zero trust, absolutely interested in it. It's something that we're not only planning for but implementing on, in small bites here. But zero trust has become a buzzword, much like encryption was going to solve all of our problems, and then blockchain just a year or two ago was going to solve all our security problems with artificial intelligence, and so everybody's throwing around this concept of zero trust, but all zero trust is not the same. And while I'm a big proponent of it, it takes a lot of planning, and before you plan, you got to define what zero trust means for you. Every vendor out there has a zero trust solution for you, but they're not all the same, and so make sure that you define it yourselves and then plan it before implementing it, because it's more about processes than it is about technologies.
Yeah, those are words of wisdom from experience right there. Very, very impressive and well thought out, that's for sure. Let's see, I've got another audience question here I'd like to move to. What do you predict will be the most costly piece of cybersecurity moving over the next 5 to 10 years? And then I guess, the person, he or she, offers some examples. Will it be retraining or hardware or software? Any thoughts on what will be the biggest impact to cost?
How about costs associated with incident response?
IR, okay.
Yeah, so we're looking in the news today. Garmin, had a ransomware incident, and they're being held hostage for about $10 million, and it's going to cost you $10 million to remediate, to pay the ransom, and then remediate all the systems so it doesn't happen. You don't have a recurrence of it. So I think when we don't invest in controls up front, it costs us more in the long run. We have a saying here in the New Jersey Office of Homeland Security. We want to be first preparers rather than first responders.
Interesting. I like that. First, you want to be first prepared. First, what would be a good way to describe it? First, I don't know. Is there a better way to describe first responder as a prepared person? I don't know. I have to think about that. But that's an interesting perspective on it. It supports that old adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Yes.
On a similar note, so one of the long-standing general ways that most organizations, most cybersecurity savvy organizations would agree is important is just simple patching, upgrading of software in your environment, and this has not always been easy with mobile because it's a very, particularly in the Android piece of the mobile operating system platform, it's a little more challenging. It's not as straightforward. You have dependencies on the handset manufacturer and the carrier and a number of other factors. So with that in mind, what impact are you seeing on from patching? Do you guys put a priority or an emphasis on that? Do you think that in general people recognize that as something that's critically important around mobile?
I think whether it's mobile or within infrastructure applications, everybody recognizes the criticality of a good vulnerability and patching program. Unfortunately, whether it's mobile or your infrastructure application, doing it is not so easy. You may have those dependencies in an operating system or an application or a network that's going to break something, and so this is something I love the word that you threw in there, simple. And talk to anybody that does this for a living, and I don't think they're going to say it's simple because there's all sorts of things that get broken. And you just look, over the past few months, Microsoft releasing some of their updates to Windows 10 have broken some things, and that's not uncommon, and that's not taking a shot at Microsoft. That happens in many applications and operating systems and the like. And so, again, I'll go back to the planning and testing and how you do it, having a strategy for it. But, the one thing with, mobile devices is you've got such a disparity of operating systems that are out there as far as versions and patch levels that it, like you said, it is tough to do to maintain currency with, the current, firmware or older firmware, as you said.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and you're certainly right about it sounds so simple, this idea of keeping your patch level up to date, but it's not always as easy as it sounds, I guess. Let's see, we've got another audience question that I'd like to ask here. It says, how are federal cybersecurity policies impacting the efficiency or practices of New Jersey or other states and jurisdictions for good or for bad? Have you seen any impact from the federal policies?
Yeah, so federal cybersecurity policies, obviously we have connections into federal systems, if you will, and we're bound by their policies and their requirements, and so that requires us to put controls in place that make us compliant with those requirements and the like. And for the good, they're pretty strict as far as that's concerned. I guess for the bad is that you've got different federal agencies with different requirements, and so it's all over the board, whether you're talking about IRS or CMS or CGIS and those types of things. We'd like to get one set of requirements from the feds that we can apply across all systems. They're relatively the same. And that's where the inefficiencies come in, is when you have different targets that you've got to meet for different systems.
Right, I see. while we're on this topic of sort of federal policies, and it's certainly not a policy, but do you look to security best guidance practice documents such as those put out by NIST and other, and if so, what others do you look at for guidance around best practice in providing security for your environment?
Sure. Yeah. So we developed a statewide information security manual, and it's derived from NIST, CSF. It's derived from 853. It's derived from the Center for Internet Security, as well as other industry and organizational best practices for cybersecurity. So that's what we derived it from. And this way we can take an approach to cybersecurity that manages risk effectively while using and applying those frameworks so that make sure that we're consistent in doing so.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's consistent with what we see most other progressive security organizations doing as well. So sounds like you're all over it. You're on top of all the best practices out there. Let's see. So it looks like we have another question come in here. It says, what role do you see artificial intelligence playing in mobile security today and in the future? So you talked before about, blockchain and AI planning to solve the world's problems, all the world's problems. How have you seen examples where AI does address specific issues for, in the questions around mobile security specifically, but in general?
So I think with just about any security technology that you're employing today, there's some AI or machine learning built into it, so that it could do predictive analytics. You think of the role of antivirus, and you can't have a signature for every piece of malware that's out there, and so you're using artificial intelligence to help predict whether that is. It shows the types of processes that'll be opened and those types of things for malware and the like. And I see the same thing happening across the entire cybersecurity space. I look at the security telemetry that we get. We can wear out analysts if we make them look at all sorts of alerts and stuff out there. So obviously artificial intelligence plays a big role in that, in helping us to take action and prioritize those alerts that are necessary. And I see that whether it's mobile security or it's going stays on the non-mobile security, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. And certainly we apply it in a very similar way. We use artificial intelligence in our own platform to allow the automation to ingest, for example, we ingest applications, as many as 100,000 a day sometimes. And you can't throw people at that. You have to apply technology and automation to it. And so you have to rely on AI. But one of the things that we often say is that the AI models are freely available. They're open source in many cases. So it's more about the data and how you train your model than it is about the software or the algorithms that you're using and that sort of thing. So having good training data and good telemetry, as you talked about, is really key to taking advantage of the AI. Let's see. So as we come up toward the end of the time period here, let me just check and see if we've got no additional questions coming in from the audience right now. So maybe as we start to sort of wrap things up here, I'll ask, there's often been this idea of a public-private partnership or cooperation in cybersecurity in particular, but in other fields as well. And it's been applied in a lot of environments effectively. But do you think it's going to have a big impact on remote work or telework? This private, public partnership kind of an approach. Will it impact this telework environment that we're in also?
So part of our mandate in the NJKIC is obviously to promote and develop public and private partnerships, and we do that whether it's sharing threat intelligence with public or private sector organizations and them sharing with us. But when you think about the infrastructure and all the technology that our systems and mobile applications and devices are running on, they're made by private sector organizations. And so developing those partnerships is really important so that they have an understanding of goals that you have as well as, you understand what they're doing. And so, I think it is key to anything, and not so much within the mobile space, but if you look at how we're handling COVID-19 impacts and the response and the partnerships between the public and private sector, that'll act as a model for cybersecurity, whether we're dealing with COVID or anything else.
Of course. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree. So I don't have any other questions that are coming in, and at least I don't see any, no. So I don't have any other questions off the top of my head. So, Mike, anything that you feel like, I didn't ask or we didn't talk about that you think is an important topic that you'd like to mention?
So, I'll just build on the public-private partnerships. That's, with everybody that's on this call. We know that New Jersey is not isolated to New Jersey. We're part of a bigger ecosystem. So anything that we can do, provide services to you guys as well, please don't hesitate to contact us. You can find out more about our programs at cyber.nj.gov. And if you do have a question that you didn't ask here, you can always contact me there, and just clicking on the NJKIC contact us link.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate your wisdom today and your experience, and thank you for all the work you do in helping keep us all safe.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks everybody. Stay safe and stay well.
All right. James, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tim and Mike, for that great conversation. I could listen to you guys chat about security all day long, and it's certainly a shared responsibility across, public, private sector down to the individuals. But yeah, thank you. Those were some really great insights and some best practices for our audience. Again, thank you to our audience for taking the time and tuning in with us. Today's event presented by Lookout has been recorded, and you'll receive a link so that you can watch it again. And also, I strongly encourage you to share that with your colleagues. So, thanks again. I hope everybody has a great rest of their day.